Today is our last session of this series. Other than, as you know, we've got the bite-sized webinars that will also be provided to you along with the recordings of all of these live sessions. So we've got event management planning, responsible event management, risk management, emergency management planning, marketing, social media, and today we're looking at event teams and succession planning. Everybody knows who I am, Linda Tillman from Tillman Group and Revents Academy. And once again, you can find out any information you would like to know about myself and what we do at reventsacademy.com or tillmangroup.com.au. So today, we're going to look at succession planning and teams, and I like to bring these 2 points together because ultimately my view is that if you have a really good team structure, you've created a good culture, and you've got some really good strategies in place around succession planning, then that overall improves the succession of your event. Because ultimately what we want to make sure is that when someone like Marg rides off into the sunset, the event can continue into the future. So we want to make sure that we've got these things in place to ensure that the event has a life beyond you. So we're going to look at succession planning, what it is. I've got a few suggestions around strategies to consider for succession planning. We're going to talk about creating an empowered team. Then I'm going to look at a more practical structure of an event team and how having that really good structure can support succession planning. We'll then look at the importance of having clear roles and responsibilities, and don't mention the M word. You'll see what that is shortly. Does anyone have good succession planning strategies in place for your event? Do you have a good team structure? I'd be really curious to hear, once again, in the chat box, jump in, share with us what you do to ensure that your event has a life beyond you or any of the key people involved in your event. So when we look at what is succession planning, I think the best way to define it is by asking this question. This puts you in the headspace of succession planning. What would be the impact on your festival or event if the most important people or peoples on the team moved on or retired? And that, we talked about this in risk management as well, didn't we? It is a risk. A lot of events identify this as a risk. If the key leaders or the really instrumental people in delivering the event no longer are around, what impact does that have on the event? It shouldn't actually have any impact on the event. And that's the situation or the position we want to get to. You need to be ready at any point in time to have a change of the guard. And you want to aim for that to have minimal impact on the actual event. So it should just happen seamlessly in the background. And succession planning is not an event. It's actually a process. So it really is a process of making sure that events can continue to run smoothly after your team or your committee's most important people move on. So it's something you should be considering and thinking about all the time. It's not a situation of, oh my God, Marg's going to be leaving next year. We have to think about succession plans. It's something you should be doing all the time. So how do you actually do that? You need to always be thinking for the future. What does the future of the event look like? You also need to be prepared to replace yourself. And everybody should be prepared. Everybody in the team or everybody in the committee should have a responsibility to replace themselves when they leave. So they should have somebody in the wings to take on the role. And this is always interesting, this thing around replacing yourself, because if you're a leader of an event and, like Jenny has just said, been involved for many, many years, do you actually know how to let go? And this is a whole conversation, but sometimes you find that people that have a really long connection with an event It's not so much about succession planning and replacing yourself. Sometimes those people can hold the event back because they don't know how to let go. There's a fear that nobody else can do it. These are things you need to overcome as a leader, and you need to be prepared and comfortable to step aside and let somebody else take over the event. You need to also be considering all the time how to prevent burnout, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that throughout today's session, because that supports succession planning. If you burn out your team and people are doing too much, you don't have enough people to fulfill the workload, then you'll find that people are just dropping off, and new people won't want to come because that's not, you know, an attractive environment or culture to work within. So you need to be always thinking about how you prevent that burnout. You need to also build the knowledge bank. And once again, I'm not picking on you, by the way, Marg, but you made a good comment just before about using all of the templates and resources that are being provided through this series to be able to put in place good documentation, good strategies, good processes and systems so that anybody can step in and still continue to run the event smoothly. So it's this process of getting things out of your head, getting things out of everybody's head on the team, and building the knowledge bank. So you can be creating checklists, you know, policies, strategies, timelines. And another cool thing to do is create little how-to videos. You know, you might create a manual of little how-to video clips. So you might just record yourself talking about, this is how we do this process. This is how this works. You know, sometimes that can be easier than reading a long document. So you want to build up that documentation and what we call your knowledge bank. And you also need to be clear on expectations. So clear roles and responsibilities. So people want to know what's expected of them, and you need to know what's required to deliver on the event so that you can always have those people coming in and through the pipeline to actually take on roles and responsibilities. And I'll talk a bit more about roles and responsibilities with the structure shortly. Have you heard of this community commitment curve? This is something that's often used when we refer to succession planning, not just for festivals and events, but a lot of different community groups and organisations will use this, what they refer to as a commitment curve. So basically it's this idea of, you know, thinking of what the micro volunteering opportunities are, or those smaller soft commitments, and then you gradually increase. So if you can just think about looking at that chart or diagram on the screen, basically the commitment curve starts with a very small soft commitment that's a little less time required, and gradually you're moving people up that commitment curve to become more involved or to take on leadership roles within the event or the committee. Just to give you a practical and a really simple example, in an event scenario, you may start volunteers just doing a couple of hours at the event, you know, selling tickets on the gate, for example. So that might be at that discovering, onboarding stage. So, you know, you're inviting them in. It's not a big time commitment. It's really clear on expectations and what their role is. They just come for 2 hours and they actually sell tickets at the gate. But then you might actually start to move them through that engagement stage by inviting them to the post-event review or to social functions or to a strategy session on the future of the event, so that they start to become engaged with the event and go, oh, this is quite interesting. I really enjoyed, you know, the culture and the vibe volunteering at the event. I wonder if I could just take on a little bit more responsibility, until eventually they become more involved at a leadership level. So it makes sense, right? And I always can picture this at many events that I've worked with, where we can get people, because a lot of events will say to me, it's not as hard to get people to volunteer for a few hours to help at the event. The hard part is getting people to be involved in the planning stages or in the organising throughout the year. So this is just a different way to think about, getting them involved at that smaller level. It's almost a little bit sneaky when you think about it. But then you gradually, build that engagement and get them more interested so that they do want to take on more of a role. One of my really big tips to support succession planning is to make sure you've got a good culture. You've got to have a really good team culture where everybody is working as a united team towards one vision. I know that sounds a little bit fluffy, but that's where you want to get to. It's this culture of everyone understands the vision of the event. Everyone knows what the direction is, and they're really excited and empowered to be part of it. So you create this culture that people want to be part of. And this is what Airbnb are always talking about. This is the whole philosophy behind Airbnb. Their entire purpose is not to manage the community, but rather to empower the community to manage itself. So you don't want to feel like you have to drag people along kicking and screaming. You want to enable and empower people to do a great job within their role of the event. It's really about building a community that just love being involved in the event. Because if you can create that community or that culture, then other people will want to get involved as well. And then succession planning is easy. This is what not to do. And unfortunately, many event committees do fall into this, this culture of micromanaging. So if you find yourself doing a bit of this, you need to think about how you can adjust and, change this culture of feeling like you need to micromanage. And often it comes down to having in place that knowledge bank that I referred to. So knowing that people have the tools and the information that they need to do a good job of their role. Because micromanagement often happens when we feel like it's just easier to do it ourselves than to brief someone. Or some people feel like nobody can do this as good as me. It's my baby. I'm just going to do it. But if you put yourself on the other side of that, no one likes to feel like they're being watched like this. It's not a nice feeling. There's no sense of trust in that situation. So you're not going to build that empowered team and that culture if this is happening in the background. So just have a think about that. We need to stop that micromanaging, and we need to trust that if we ask somebody to do something, then they will get on and do it. So building this unified team culture that everybody wants to be part of. I really believe that if we can build teams based on empowerment and also on setting up robust systems and processes, we are going to be more efficient in how we deliver our events, which ultimately is going to result in more successful events. All right, how to empower your team. So if you can empower your team, your volunteers, and provide them with the systems and the processes, like I said, to operate within, then your job becomes easier. So here's a few practical tips on how you can empower your team. So passion equals position. So what I mean by this is that what really motivates a volunteer should mirror the roles and responsibilities that you assign them. So if a volunteer is really good at, say, accounting or enjoys playing with numbers and finances, then obviously the finance team or the finance coordinator is the right fit for them. So you need to match up their interests, their passions with the position or the role on the team. Don't try to mold someone to a certain position if they don't have any experience or interest in that area, because you just won't get the passion and the outcomes from them. You also need to be very clear about what needs to be done, how long it's going to take, and what the deadline is. So be really, really clear and upfront and respect their time. You know, be really upfront about expectations on a volunteer. What is the time commitment required? If you can give an estimation, say, oh, the finance coordinator role, you know, requires typically, you know, 10 hours a month, but then when we get closer to the event, it might be, you know, 10 hours a fortnight. People like to know what they're signing up for. And then you need to have consistent communication. So volunteers volunteer because they want to contribute to the event. They want to see the event be a success, just like you do. So have some really open, regular communication channels. Provide them opportunities to contribute. Treat them like, you know, the insiders. Give them, you know, special announcements, first-hand information. Most importantly, just remember that they're there and that they're important. Someone said to me, so I've got another group of events that I'm working with in regional New South Wales. And when I talked to them about volunteer management, this one lady came back the following week and she said, you know what I did after that session? We haven't talked to our volunteers during all of lockdown. We just wait until the event is ready to go and then we get in touch with them, you know, make sure they're all signed up and ready to go. She said, after your session, I contacted all of our volunteers and just checked in on them. How are you going during this time? How are things? How's life? I thought that was a really cool bit of feedback, because often we just underestimate the importance of our volunteers, or perhaps not underestimate the importance of them, but we forget that they're human as well, and that, you know, they have a life outside of the event. And if you want to create a great culture and a really empowered team, then you have to communicate with your team, stay in touch with them, get to know them. And I know that can take time, but if you've got somebody that is dedicated to volunteer management, then that's the role that they can play. You should also offer opportunities for them to provide feedback. So listening to them all the time. People love to be heard. So ask them questions, host event debriefs, provide a volunteer survey at the end of your event, invite them to have input into, you know, how the event can be improved, the future direction of the event. Whenever we do any strategic planning for events, we always have a focus group session with volunteers, and some of the best ideas come out of volunteers. Because often they're, you know, the ear on the ground at the events, they see things unfolding. So provide those opportunities for them. Give them meaningful work, which is kind of the same as one slightly. But I guess the key there is, don't just think, okay, they're volunteers, so we'll get them to stuff envelopes. You know, always think about how you can give volunteers meaningful work. There'll always be some of those mundane jobs that need to be done. And volunteers can do those, but I guess it's important to just think and manage how much certain volunteers are doing of those mundane jobs. Say thank you all the time, and just let go. That goes back to my point of micromanaging. So, you know, you need to empower people. So if you are a bit of a controlling personality, then you need to learn to let go a little bit, show trust, and I guarantee you, you'll get results. So, as I said, I feel that if you have a really good structure within your team, and you follow some of those strategies that I talked about around succession planning and, you know, everyone replacing themselves, having that knowledge bank, then succession planning of your event becomes so much easier and can often just be a natural thing that happens. So now what I want to just talk you through is this this model of how you can structure your event. And it's all based on breaking your event down into smaller chunks. Now, I know that's a very technical term, but that's really what it is thinking when you look at your event and you just go, this is Linda Tillman's festival, there are so many parts to it, right? That it's overwhelming. So you look at it all and go, oh my gosh, how do we manage all of that? That's such a big job. So you need to break it down, break it down, break it down, break it down, smaller chunks. So this is just one way I like to demonstrate how you can actually do that. So this is where you have, what you can see on the slide at the moment is essentially 2 tiers, but it's really 3 tiers, because under those subcommittee groups, you then have your event day volunteers. So they're people that don't want to commit year round to having any major responsibility, but they're happy to help on the day with certain aspects of the event. And I call this a snowflake model, and I'll show you a diagram of that in a moment. But essentially what you want to try to do with your event, and this will, you know, obviously vary depending on the type of event and the size of your event, but you'll have the management committee or the executive group at the top. You'll then have your subcommittee group, so they're more of your operations team. And then under that, you then have your volunteers that just help on the day. I shouldn't say just, but that help on the day. So you need to take the time to set up a structure like this with all of these chunks, all of these different roles within your event, having checklists, timelines, budgets, work plans. This is where the detail comes in. So it can take a little bit of time setting this up, but once it's set up, if somebody leaves, it's all there ready for somebody to come in. So breaking it into manageable chunks. So have a think about your event. Think about how your event's structured at the moment. Are you doing everything? Maybe you've got a handful of people. Maybe you've got your husband or wife and your kids or friends helping out. And that's okay. But do they have clear roles and responsibilities? Does everybody know what their primary role is? And how their role contributes to the overall success of the event? So we need to try to get away from that, having 1 to 2 key people doing everything. And this is the way to do it. So just remember, break your event into smaller chunks. And I want you to think of it like this snowflake. So if we take the bar coordinator as an example, this is what a snowflake model would look like. So if I go back, so I'm taking all of these subcommittee groups. Up here, you've got the executive group. Sorry, I'll just take one step back. Up here, you've got your executive group at the top. So this is more of your management committee. They meet regularly. They make big decisions about the strategy and direction of the event. They're the key decision makers, if you like, and they work as a really close unit. The next tier down, our subcommittee groups, as I said, is more your operations team. So this is where you break down all of those aspects of your event into smaller pieces. And then each of these subcommittee groups has a coordinator, and that coordinator then creates their own little snowflake model, which is this bar coordinator example. So each of the subcommittee, and they can have the you know, the autonomy to determine this themselves. So if you're the bar coordinator, You might want to just do it all yourself, depending on how much is involved, or you might find some other people to actually help you. So you might have someone that's going to manage stock for you, someone that's going to manage setup and pack down, someone that's going to manage cash, someone that's going to look after the licensing and approvals and requirements. So you can see how the job can be broken down once again into smaller chunks. So what this means, if we're talking about succession planning, setting up a really efficient team structure, for each of those roles within your event, if you can actually break it down and get some clarity around what are the roles and responsibilities, when do things have to be done by, setting up those work plans and documentation and structure in that knowledge bank, then if somebody does leave the event for whatever reason, it really supports the ability of somebody new to come and just pick that up where it's left off. What you need to remember, as I talked about before, your purpose is not to manage the team. Your purpose is to empower the team to manage itself. And this is how you can empower people to manage themselves. Give them the framework, give them the resources, give them the checklist and the information, and step back a little bit and let them do their bit. And then you have, as you can see from this, you've got the executive at the top. They make sure that everything comes together. So they're obviously keeping an eye on things. You're not just letting everybody kind of go rogue and do their own thing. You're keeping an eye on things, but you're just giving people that ability to get on with the job. Because these guys are operational, right? So they're not necessarily interested in strategic planning or going to regular meetings or any of that kind of bigger picture stuff. They just want to do their part. So just let them do it. It saves you time and energy in the long run. Now, just to blow your mind a little bit, this is actually the festival organisational chart for the Woodford Folk Festival in Queensland. So Woodford is a really successful festival. They've built a really great community culture, and this is their org chart. So it starts in the middle with their Woodfordia members. Pardon me, then it moves out to the director and management committee, executive manager, all the way out to their area managers, department heads, and then their volunteers. That's what I mean by breaking it down into smaller chunks. That's a lot of chunks. It's a really cool structure. Now, this is really critical. It's a little bit of a time-consuming job initially, but you only have to do it once and then you just keep it up to date every year. It's so simple. It just requires some time. And this will really support your succession planning for your event. And I've actually have a template for this that will be supplied with this webinar. So you've already got a head start on creating this for your event. I would say this is probably one of the most important tasks in setting up a framework around succession planning. And not only succession planning, but also supporting efficiencies and empowering your team. This is where you can have all the information in one spot so those operational coordinators can get on with the job. It's simple, but it's time consuming. But if you can invest some time to set up really clear roles and responsibilities for all of the different aspects, those smaller chunks of your event, then it's going to save you an immense amount of time in the future. So this is where you're taking everything out of your head. So essentially for each of these subcommittees, so down here, you'll define what these are for your event. Each of these coordinators or areas within your event will have one of these documents. And what it does is it outlines really clearly all of the information that they require to do their job. So you have the role of the event. You actually include the budget. So what is the budget allocation for them to deliver on that? So if it is the bar coordinator, what's the budget for the bar? Give them that information. Sometimes events go, oh, I don't trust them to have, any authority to, spend money. Why? Let them do the job. And if the budget says there's $2,000 for the bar, for example, then note that in the budget, because if they need to go out and get quotes and source suppliers, they need to know what budget they've got. You don't want them coming back to you saying, oh, I got this quote for this person. Is that enough? Or empower them to do the job. The next point is file storage. So this is where you have shared filing systems, and this is where you put the links. So you might have a Google Drive folder for the bar coordinator, and that's where they put all of their documentation. So when we say building a knowledge bank, you want all of that knowledge to be in one central location. So you don't want the bar coordinator to be, creating documentation and, doing stock take and filling out paperwork on their own personal computer. You want them to save it into a central filing system. So give them the link to that. If the position requires an email address, then you put that in there as well. Most positions won't, but if it is like, for example, somebody that's coordinating market stalls, you might have an email address that says stallholder@ourfestival.com.au. Always include a little brief outline of the objective of the position. So give some insights into, the purpose of this position, what your expectations are, and how it feeds into the overall vision of the event. Then this is the rest of the document. Then there is essentially an outline of what are the key tasks and what are the milestones. So this will feed directly out of your own big planning timeline. So if you've got a planning timeline for the event, then you pull that apart as well and give each of those different coordinators a checklist. So if the bar coordinator receives this, they know that they have to, provide the volunteer coordinator with any volunteer requirements 4 months before the event. So it's a simple checklist. They can make notes on it. If other jobs come up during the year, they can just add to it so that it's this continual improvement of the documents each year. Then if somebody else comes in, say the bar coordinator only does it for 1 year, someone else is stepping up the following year, it's all there. All the documentation is there. It's all in a central filing system. It makes it so much easier to hand over roles. And if you imagine you've got that for all of your operational roles, so all of these roles down here, you've essentially mapped out how to run your event. You could even create a little video for each one that just talks about, let's say the bar coordinator, you might just have a little video, 1 minute video saying this is what the bar coordinator does, introducing the role, and doing it via video could be a more effective way of doing that as well. So does that make sense, in terms of just setting up really clear roles and responsibilities linked to a really good structure? And then if you imagine you've got, everybody in those roles is briefed to be able to replace themselves, then the bar coordinator just goes, all right, I know that I'm going to hand over the role of bar coordinator to Joe next year. I've got all the folders set up. That's up to date. Done. There you go, Joe. Now it's yours. Obviously, there's a bit more of a process to that, but you see what I mean. It just really allows that succession planning to happen more natural. And it also makes your event more appealing as a volunteer role. If it's organised, if there's structure, if people know what the expectations are, they're more inclined to volunteer. Now, I mentioned earlier, one of the tips around succession planning was to prevent burnout. You don't want the committee looking like this. You definitely don't want your operations team, so all of those subcommittee groups, looking like this. So one of my biggest tips for events is, with that structure I've just talked to you about, don't burn out your subcommittee or your operational team members by making them come to monthly meetings. They need to be empowered to just get on with their job and report in as necessary. I'm seeing a really good shift in this, but even 18 months ago, 2 years ago, there was still this culture with events and event committees that we have to meet every month and everybody's got to come, and we spend, 2 or 3 hours talking about things. That's a good way to burn out your team. So my recommendation is only the executive tier, so that management level at the top, meet regularly, and they're looking at the strategy, they're looking at the timeline, they're making sure everything's on track, they're checking the finances. It's a real productive process. And those operational team members are just getting on with the job. And as I said, they report in when required, or if there's a challenge, then they might come to a committee meeting to address the challenge and to get some support around that. So meetings, I know, are essential, but they can also be very big time wasters. So I just want you to think about that and just to consider that, from a burnout perspective. I've seen it plenty of times where events and event teams get burnt out just from meetings, not by doing the event, but by going to meetings. And that's all I have for today's session on event teams and succession planning. Does anyone have any questions? We've only got a small group today, so if you want to unmute yourself, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions or raise any discussion points that you would like.
I was going to say, I was just looking over some of the templates there that you'd sent through with the suite of templates that we got from you, Linda, and it really does make it easy. Like looking at the agenda template that you've given for the 12 months out, that is such a valuable resource for events, and I'll send that out to the group after this email, and later you'll be able to get it from the web with the recordings. But such a valuable planning tool there, and so helpful to get people plan for their events. And thank you so much, because I think it will help all of our events across the board. I mean, obviously, you can scale it down or up depending on your event, but so great.
Absolutely, because that's and I'm not saying that to try to be funny, in terms of meetings. I do see it a lot where, and a lot of the time, the event committees don't see it themselves, but they're burning people out through, administrative processes. And I think we need to just learn how to be more efficient and use modern technology to do things and to save people time, so that they can invest that time in the event, because ultimately that's what we want, is people putting that time and energy into creating a great event. I see, Marg, you said that you've found in COVID that Zoom has really helped in terms of keeping people up to date and maintaining interest in the festival, which is excellent. And that's the thing, it's not just, there's Zoom, there's video conference calls like this. Also, I've seen some events have group chats, so if you because the challenge sometimes with events is we have so much to talk about, because there's so many moving parts to organising an event, that's where meetings can run over and get sidetracked and derailed, whatever you like to call it. So what I've seen some events do is they actually have an online chat. So basically it provides a platform. So if you've got an idea, you've got a challenge, you know, anything that perhaps is outside of a standard meeting agenda can be thrown into this online chat. Because often you find everyone comes to meetings with different interests and their own little agendas. So you need to manage that quite tightly to keep it on track. And that's where having something like this will, you know, it will definitely help funnel that level of communication away from the meeting, but still giving them the opportunity to feel like they're being heard.
Can I also,
Sorry, Mark, yeah.
Can I say that I think that meetings have a different feel to the Zoom meetings. When we had the odd one or two meetings when we were not locked down, people had to get used to that actual interpersonal, you know, their interpersonal relationships came into it much more than on Zoom.
Yeah.
So that took a little bit of managing. But I mean, we have different problems in that a lot of our members or people who come to meetings are quite elderly. And in fact, that's another issue that, you know, to generate interest or generate just having the strength for them to go on and do the work. But I mean, that's another issue. But I do find that people have been pretty faithful to meeting attending, or however bored they might become. But I mean, it's another issue that's a succession issue of getting younger people on your committee too. So I mean, that's a little bit of a muddled thought, but the Zooming was easy, not quite as for some people, not quite as much fun.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's the
and it could be a combination, Marg. You know, I know we will or you will come out of lockdown and there will be a time where face-to-face meetings can happen all the time, but I know what you mean. It's almost like needing to get this mix of fun and connection, because that's something you also miss through video conferences, is that connection. And I think that's important in building a team. And that's where face-to-face is so much better. So it's almost getting this, I guess, a bit of a mix of face-to-face meetings that allow for some of that opportunity to have fun. Maybe everyone brings along a plate of food and it's a bit more of a social thing as well, but still focused on outcomes, combined with some, you know, video conference meetings that can be much just to the point, I guess, you know, because you can manage them a bit better.
I'd just like to say a big thank you, Linda and Nicole. Thanks for facilitating these. I haven't been to every single one, but I will watch the videos. My colleague Eva has been here as well, jumping in and out. So together, the team of us, it's currently our executive committee for our festival, but we'll expand it a little bit. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. I do need to scoot to another meeting in a minute, but yeah, it's been very helpful in trying to get our framework together. So appreciate the help.
My absolute pleasure. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Ciao.
Ciao.
Linda, likewise, I'll thank you for all of your efforts, and Nicole for coordinating. It's been very, very helpful. From today's session, for me, I think the commitment curve, whilst on the one hand it's common sense, just thinking about it and being more mindful about it when, you know, you've got interested people, first-time people doing some flyer deliveries, and that's all they've had to worry about, but they've been very excited to do it. And then fostering that engagement progressively down the track, that sort of thing, just being more conscious of it, I think really, really helps. So thank you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's the key, is being conscious of it, right? It's just remembering that those people did a little job at the festival. I wonder if they'd be interested at doing a bit more, you know, and just building on that.
And also to be aware that some people will be happy to do it for 2 or 3 years or once or twice, but you cannot expect everyone to go on and do it year after year after year. You really need to have somebody in the wings to come in and pick it up.
Absolutely.
A similar role up, not the same role, but a similar role. So, I mean, I've seen plenty of people come and go and a few drop off the perch too.
Yeah, and I suppose one of those things as well is when if you know that you are going to have your last year or last go at it, then to provide some mentoring opportunities too, to make sure you pass that knowledge on. If there's somebody there interested in the role, it's a great opportunity.
And that, yeah, absolutely, Nicole. And that's what I mean about having someone in the wings, you know, always thinking about and putting that, I know you don't want to put more responsibility on others, but just also reminding everybody. So if you've got somebody doing a particular role in the event, just make them conscious of that. Just, you know, say, you know, just be thinking, is there someone else that can take on your role when you're ready to step down? Because often people will have connections, or they might have somebody that's helping them in their role that might want to step up in the future. You don't want it just to be, say, the president's responsibility to always be looking for new people.
I'd just like to say thank you to both of you. It's been really good to have some templates to look at to see how we're travelling and what we're recording, and to add different bits and pieces in. So it's been invaluable. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Celia.
Thanks, Celia. Well, thank you all so much. Unless anyone has any other questions, then we will call that done. I thank you all so much for joining us today. And as Nicole has said, all of the recordings and all of the resources will be made available to you in the coming days or weeks. And I wish everybody great success with their events. You're doing a marvellous job. It's not the easiest of industries at the best of times, but certainly the last 18 months have been quite challenging. So here's to a very exciting and successful 2022. And yeah, I wish you all the success possible for each of your events.
No, thank you.
And thank you, Nicole, for the opportunity.
Oh, it's been wonderful working with you, Linda. I think I'm so thrilled about the resources that we'll have ongoing for our events. It's going to be super valuable for some time, and I'm really grateful for it. And working with you has been wonderful. So.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.